All right. Good afternoon, folks. Let's see. Some people joining here. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. Hopefully, let's see here. Check. So again, good afternoon. Welcome to the HMIS training for agency managers for street outreach, path, and RIE projects. We're going to spend some time this afternoon. Our group is smaller than our other training sessions in this instance. So we're going to really try to focus on questions that, specific to your projects that you may want to submit during the webinar. And we're going to do some introductions, run through the agenda, and then based on the size of those attending this afternoon, I really want to focus on the project type that you are, currently have access to, and the clients that you're serving. So I'm going to let Tony, let me go ahead and have you introduce yourself, and then we'll just jump in.
Okay. Hi, thank you, Michelle. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today. I'm very excited about today's presentation. My name is Tony Diaz. I am the PA HMIS administrator. So we don't have, we have postponed our go live date for a few weeks. And as soon as we have a new date settled upon, we will be sending out emails to let you all know when that new date is. The procedure for it will remain the same. So there is going to be a couple of days of no data entry where we do, suggest that you use your any procedures that you would use for a holiday or a weekend that we recommend you put those in place for the 2 or 3 days that we will not be doing data entry while they migrate over the new information to our new Client Track 19 platform. The training site is open, and we are asking that everybody, log in under the MyFake organization, and we're sending out links and emails over the next coming weeks to get people on board with that. And as agency managers, you are the first to receive links. So if you have not received if you are an agency manager and you have not received or even a regional manager and have not received a link or a temporary password to the new training site, you can go ahead and let me know, and I'll see about getting those on to you. To contact, you can use the PA mailbox. That's the RA PA HMIS mailbox there, and that is good for any questions that you may have, request, procedural questions, policy questions, anything like that. We also have the PennsylvaniaCOC.org webpage, which is filled with just a wealth of information on HMIS, and also broken down by continuums for the East and the West. If there's anything that sparks your interest or anything you want to read about, there's a wealth of information in there. When we do release the new Client Track 19, we will also be, after a period of review, releasing step-by-step guides on how to run reports, and we'll be adding on the coordinated entry guides as they get updated, and our policies and procedures as we incur any updates on those as well. So the videos here are being recorded, the classes are being recorded, and we're going to make an effort to get those available to you if you have interest in reviewing one of these classes. And also, like I said, we will be updating step-by-step guides after a short review. The new system is up and running, and we've worked out the kinks. So with that, I'll say once again, thank you, Michelle, for providing this presentation today. I'm excited about it, and I'll look forward to it. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. It also looks like Jesus with Ecovia Solutions has joined us. So Jesus and Tony will be taking your questions through the GoToWebinar menu option. So please, again, feel free to submit questions so that we really focus on what your interests are for the afternoon session, because it is a small group, and so it's a great opportunity to get your specific questions answered. My name is Michelle Milliken. I work for Ecovia Solutions. I've been with Ecovia about 3 months, but prior to my joining ClientTrack Ecovia, I was a system administrator for the city of Indianapolis and Balance Estate, Indiana. And so I have about 12 years of experience working within the ClientTrack environment, and was thrilled to get the opportunity to join the company and in leading our product. And so training is a perfect opportunity for us to get feedback about the product and what your end user needs, and the bells and whistles and things that you like in the system. So as Tony mentioned, we are on a short delay for go live with the new ClientTrack 19. When you do get the email that we're going live, you will continue to maintain a read-only access with the current system, and that'll take about 2 days. And during that time, we'll be working on the configuration and testing. And then you'll receive a second email that we are live on the new environment. So you'll get an email with your new website login, and your current username and password will remain the same. Okay. So we're going to talk today a little bit about what the workgroup access means, and just touch on a couple data points. In a quick review of our attendees, it looks like some of you participated in one of the earlier training sessions related specifically to the street outreach and RIE projects. So I want to spend our time in the manner that serves you best. And so we can take specific questions on the intake and updates, but I want to spend most of our time today in discussing the report section. Okay. So again, we have Jesus and Tony that will be there. Nobody's submitted any questions yet. We're still, even this morning after 16 trainings, I think, still getting questions that haven't been submitted before. And so that's a great, it's a great teachable moment for us in knowing what your needs are in the system. So the brief agenda is attached to the webinar as you can download it from the attachment handout section to make notes or just as a quick reminder. So I'm going to go ahead and get us into the system. And so as Tony mentioned, DCED is in the process of making sure that everybody has an account set up in your new training environment. And you'll know for sure that it's the training environment because it has a little mouse with a graduation cap. And so just know that when you log in this environment, that it is a training environment and you should not be entering any client level data, real client data into the training environment. Okay. Go ahead and something that came up yesterday is also you, as your passwords get reset in the training environment, you may get an email notifying you that your password has been updated. Don't panic, that's a security feature. So just to be aware that that's not a change in your production, your current configuration password. It's going to be related to your access to the training environment. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use these settings. And then since this training was geared more towards agency managers or maybe program directors, sorry, big spider. So many of you will have access to 2 different work groups, both in training and in the new production environment. So you'll have access to the 2020 users, and you'll have access to the agency manager work group. Now, at this point in time and when we go live, the only access that your agency manager account has is the ability to see domestic violence assessments within your organization that one of maybe your other staff members created. So just a quick review: when a domestic violence assessment has been completed during an intake, that is automatically restricted to the user that completed that assessment. So for reporting purposes and checking data quality, agency managers are also granted that access so that they can help troubleshoot on reports and things like that. So right now, that is the difference between the 2 accounts. And when you get your training account, you should only have access to My Fake Organization. And as we go through the process, you'll see the different project types that you can select. And if for some reason you need access to a different project type, you can submit that as an issue or a ticket, and we can get that additional project set up. Just keep in mind, at this point, we're limiting this to generalized project types. So if I take a look at my open enrollments, you'll notice these are all, and they're based off of project type. So if you know that you have an ESG rapid rehousing, then this is the enrollment you're going to want to select. If you have an ESG street outreach, this is the program you want to use to, to practice. And the same for if you have a RIE project, we have an outreach. We should probably add a transitional living and maybe a COC rapid rehousing, just to make sure that we have multiple project types. And then here for those of you that are PATH on the call. Okay. No questions yet. I wish I could give away. We were doing this in person, I would have prizes and candy, but since we're not in person, we'll just have to go along with the gratitude verbally for questions that get submitted. So, one of the things that might help us is just in that question box, if you just want to shoot us a quick note about the project types. So if we don't have anybody on here that is a runaway homeless youth project, then I won't, I won't go over runaway homeless youth information. So if you wanted to just take a quick second and submit that in the question box, that would be greatly appreciated. The other change, and this will be in either work group that you're logged into as an agency manager or supervisor, is you'll have access to an additional menu item called My Team. And if you are set up as a supervisor in the system, then you'll be able to click on this. I'm not set up as a supervisor, so I don't see anything here. But I would see my case manager's caseload, some recent case notes. We've had several suggestions and about maybe showing how many paused operations case managers have. So that is one of the, I think, really great suggestions that we've had submitted. So that would be a second. Because of my access in the system, I don't have the ability to change my password in this location. So you will be able to go in. So if you have a policy, I think it's every 90 days, you're required to change your password. That will remain true for both your training environment and also in the production environment. And then if you don't log in within a certain amount of time, it may deactivate your account. So just, keeping that in mind. Okay, so during the original training, we kind of went through what the options here are. So I want to go ahead and jump over into a client workspace. And so far it looks like we have Runaway Homeless Youth project. We have a group that's ESG, SSVF, and a street outreach. And then we also have a DV agency that's providing emergency shelter. So if you're not one of those and you want us to touch on something, go ahead and put that in for us. So when we start to get into the client record, so I mentioned your access as an agency manager to the domestic violence assessment. So you would have access to be able to go in and view these assessments, regardless of whether or not you were the person who entered them into the system. Okay. Otherwise, you as an end user not listed as an agency manager would only see those assessments that you created. Okay. So highlighting that difference. I'm going to go ahead and start an intake. Actually, I'm going to pick a different client here. So again, in an effort to limit our duplication of clients in the system, only searching first few letters, because notice Greg has 2 G's, or if it was Gregory, just searching by the first few letters of the first and last name, and then working from that client record. Great, an ESG street outreach, so another. So here we have a client who has an enrollment into an emergency shelter, okay? I think it's always helpful too, before you start working or enrolling clients into the system, that you view their dashboard just to see what kind of information, when you do the intake, you might want to make sure that you're collecting and knowing if they could potentially already be enrolled in your project. Okay. So when I start the intake, again, I want to review. So maybe at this point, the client wants to go ahead and provide me with a social security number. One of the things that we really stressed in the last training was there are no circumstances in which you should be entering fake social security information, especially for if you're a runaway homeless youth or project or street outreach. A youth, they may not know their social security number, so it would be more appropriate to select client doesn't know. And then if you're working, from a street outreach perspective and you encounter somebody at the public library, and, begin that conversation about you being an outreach professional, and, finding out if the client is engaged in any services anywhere. They might not want to give you all of this information at your first meeting. So there are definitely times when it is appropriate to not ask questions. But again, we don't want to put in fake data so that our data quality reports look better. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I'm going to review, and so maybe now I know that my client has actually never served in the military, so I can go ahead and complete that information. So I'm going to go ahead and select finish. And so this is just going to show me the family members that are currently part of the household, but maybe they're not going to be a part of this enrollment. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move past this one and show. So for those of you that have a RI project, an emergency shelter, obviously you wouldn't enroll somebody that's 50, but notice when you go through, you just have a project start date. Okay. If you would make the determination that your client is actually going to be in the ESG Street Outreach Project, you have a project start date, and then you have a date of engagement. So the differences between the two, the project start date is your first contact date or first encounter. The date of engagement is really that point at which the client understands that you're working on behalf of an organization to provide them or connect them to services, and they're willing to provide you with additional assessment data. So again, you want to get credit for those initial meetings that you have with a client, but they may not yet have that date of engagement, and that's okay. We've talked before about how the data that we have in our system should really match the story that we tell people about our projects. So it's not, the general public that doesn't work in homeless service provision, they might think that there's outreach workers, they go out, they get people off the street and put them in shelter, put them in, put clients in permanent housing. We know as, boots on the ground people that may take 6 months, 9 months, a year to build rapport with a client to get them off the street and into shelter or permanent housing. And so being able to have documentation that shows it took, it took, 6 months in order to really get the client engaged with your street outreach project or your PATH project. And so we had a great question. Does this mean that project start date and date of engagement can be different? So if you're talking about an emergency shelter, you won't have an engagement date. But if you also have street outreach, then there are times over the course of the last few years, I've noticed that the project start date is usually different than the date of engagement for an outreach project. Now, this type of an outreach project is a little bit different than sometimes people have, or organizations have, a supportive services project that they might call an outreach, but it's set up in the system as supportive services. And in that instance, it's not going to be set up as a true street outreach. or for path projects, either one, whether it's street outreach or supportive, you're going to have a date of engagement. So that's kind of the difference there between an actual street outreach and then a community organization that calls their supportive services project and outreach. And so for path, I have even more dates that I need to be concerned with. So I still have my project start, still have my date of engagement, and then my path information. So technically, for a client to receive a path funded service or referral, they need to have a status. And before they can have a status, they need to have an engagement date. It would be highly unlikely, unless you've had a previous relationship with a client, that your project start date, your date of engagement, and the date of their path determination is all on the same day. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but it is more likely an exception than the rule. And so you can see that based upon the project type that I select, I mean, it automatically, the system will know what, so like for rapid rehousing, we had somebody on, so we have our project start date, and then we have a housing move-in date. So if you have an SSVF rapid rehousing or an ESG rapid rehousing, or a locally funded rapid rehousing project, you're going to have a project start date, which is defined up here, has some specific criteria, and then the date that they actually take possession of their unit. So they sign the lease, you're giving them their keys, that's their actual move-in date. This isn't an anticipated move-in date. You don't want to, so even if I think my client's going to move in on Friday, a lot can happen between now and Friday. So I want to wait until it's a sure thing that they're in that unit, or at least have access to that unit before I put in a move-in date. Okay. So again, the system knows based on the project type that we've selected. I meant to go back to street outreach. There we go. The other trigger, the date of engagement. So a lot of people worry about if they meet a client on the street and they just get basic information like their name, maybe where they're staying, you know, that where they generally reside. So that would prompt a project start date. But if I don't get any other information, I still want to log that that was my first contact. Until I have a date of engagement, there's not like a data quality report within the system. That data quality of being missing or don't know, refused, doesn't, think of a different term. It's not reflected in a data quality report until the client actually has a date of engagement. Okay, so we don't want, we have instances where I've seen in some COCs and organizations where they have a super secret spreadsheet, and it's for all of those clients that maybe they just know that their client's name is Bob and he lives under the 25th Street Bridge. Okay, so they don't want to, I guess, you know, get dinged or be in trouble if they enter the person into HMIS with that limited information. So they put them on a super secret spreadsheet and wait until they have enough information and the client's engaged. We want to encourage folks to start that data collection, you know, with that first client record or that first client contact. So go ahead and mark save. And I'm not going to go through the assessment because, again, I think a lot of you participated earlier. But then, again, based on the program that we selected, the system knows which questions are going to be required for your particular project. So if you have an SSVF prevention project, it's going to walk you through the additional information that you need for that client, like a VA medical center code, the specific SSVF prevention assessment, and then the address information for the household. So that's the nice thing about the work that Tony and Ritu are doing behind the scenes right now in making sure that our projects are set up in the system correctly so that you're prompted as an end user to answer everything that is required. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this workflow just so we can spend some more time on reporting. So notice that even though I didn't complete the workflow, I was past the point of the enrollment. And so it did create an enrollment, but I'm going to have missing assessments when we go in to run this report. So do we have any questions about what we do? Oh, one other thing, on your current living situation, so this should be recorded for each encounter that you have with any of your outreach, so your PATH, your RI, and your ESG. So you would select your enrollment and then where is the client currently staying. So if they're sleeping in their car under the 25th Street Bridge, or if they are now in emergency shelter. It's difficult for me to come up with a scenario where I would have an interaction with my client and not want to record a contact. So if anybody has any of those scenarios, I'd be happy to hear them. But if you want to also include the current living along with that contact, then you just want to go ahead and record the contact in that service. Okay. So go ahead and mark save on this. Okay. So no questions on this, because everybody's just excited to get to reports. Okay. So again, you were probably used to seeing your most of your reports listed in the home workspace. We've consolidated those into one location in the report workspace. So when I come in here, if you previously had access to Data Explorer, you'll maintain that access. Just keep in mind that since we are reverting the system back to more of a standard functionality, if you have custom fields or custom areas in the system, for Data Explorer, we call them domains. You'll want to double check and test your saved reports in the Data Explorer, because some of those options may no longer be valid. So if you have anything that's saved, we just want you to go in and test those. Okay. So files on server, you should have this now. This is where you go once you run and export. Excuse me. Once you run and export. So for those that are on the call, it sounds like we have some folks that are required to maybe submit a caper. We have somebody that's SSVF, so you are monthly running your SSVF export. And for our RI folks on the call, you have, I believe in May, coming up a RI export that will be due. So the process for these is going to be the same. So when you go through to generate the reports, and so even if you are not HUD or partner agency funded, you can still go in and run these reports to get information about your projects. So I went ahead and I jumped in and I ran a report so we could look at it during the call today. But just when I go through to set up my report, either for your CAPER or your APR, and again for SSVF or RI, you can still run these reports to check your data quality and get information about your project. You can select any date range that you would like. You will only have access to your fake organization. You'll want to be specific in your grant program and component. So say it was ESG, and it's for my street outreach project. One of the hot ticket items that we have right now, and this would remain the same prior to the update and including after. If you're going in to generate any of these reports and you begin selecting criteria, and when you get to filter by the grant or funding source, you don't see your option, then we would want you to submit a ticket, either through the system or via the email that's on the handout for Tony and Ritu. So the example I gave before was if you have a supportive services project that maybe you call outreach. So if it was a street outreach, and switch to a program type, and if it was a services only project, then, oops, I guess I still have that, it shouldn't. So notice here when I go to filter by the program type, I don't have anything to select. So this is a warning for us and for you that maybe your program is set up differently than you anticipate in the system. And so again, some of the work that's going on behind the scenes at DCED is including a review of the project and the grant setups so that you have the access to the reporting tools and things that you need based on your project type. So let me go ahead and switch this back to street outreach. And this at the very bottom on your CAPERs and APRs, you have the option to generate a validation file. So if I run the export without the validation file, I'm not going to get any client level data. It's all going to be aggregate data that I'm going to use to upload someplace else. If you wanted to have, so like if you already know you might have a data quality issue, then you want to go ahead and run that validation file, because if you have known data quality issues, this is where you're going to go to find them and then get them resolved before you run your final, I guess, report to upload. I'm going to go ahead and run the export, and I'm going to encrypt this so when it downloads, I have to put in a password. Oops, make sure. This does not have to be your client track password. It's just that you will have to know this in order to access the files. Okay, so it tells me that it's been queued up and it'll be processed. And depending upon the time frame that you ran the project and the number of clients you have is kind of what, and how many other people are running reports at the same time is what will determine about how long it will take in the queue. If you're like me and want to know exactly where my report is in the process, you can, under the files on server, you can click to view where your task is in the list. So right now, we've had some other folks do some report running. And so this is the one that I just submitted, and it's not started yet. But when it does start, it'll switch to show that it's processing.
Michelle?
Yes.
One question. I have here a question, and I think it's related. For any of the programs, is there an anticipated date that we will no longer be able to enter actual data into the current client track before the new client track goes live? I think we addressed that at the beginning, but maybe we can repeat it here.
Sure. So the date for the go live in the new environment did get postponed for a couple of weeks, and Tony and his team will send out an email with the new go live date for that. Tony, I don't know if you want to say anything specific about that.
I would only add that we do anticipate the no data entry for at least 2 days prior to the new go live date. So there will be a period where we are not entering data into client track 15, and there will be a period of a couple of days where, and then we will restart. Everybody will log into client track 19 and begin entering the data in there. So there will be a couple of days where we are not entering data into HMIS. But when we have that final date set of the new go live date, we will also announce which those days are that we're not going to be entering any data.
Great, thank you, Tony. That actually, Carol, is leads me to something we didn't mention before. But since we have folks on the call that are specifically working with SSVF and RI projects, you do have some deadlines coming up. So those of you that have an SSVF project, within, I think it's the first 3 or 5 days now of the month, you're required to do that upload. And then RI, I believe your upload is sometime in May. So that's something that we'll definitely take into consideration so that you continue to have access and be able to, you'll still be able to run reports. But if you would need to, if you found a data error that you needed to fix, we'll make sure that downtime is appropriate to your submission dates. But if you have an APR or a CAPR that's due by the end of May, hopefully you've already started working on those. But if not, I would encourage you to do that so that maybe you could get those submitted before the new configuration. So you're not trying to scramble to learn the new system and then submit one of those federal reports at the same time. So I went ahead before our training today so that we didn't have to wait for our reports to run. Just a couple of tidbits of information here. The preload files, so when you run a report and you generate that validation file, you're going to get 3 reports that are basically, they're all part of that export that you just generated. And the preload document is just, it's just like a staging site. You're not going to use that data for anything. So you can, in fact, once it preloads, just to get this, your files on server, keep it cleaned up, you can delete that preload. So the second file that generates is your actual documentation or your actual files that you're going to use to upload. And then the last is that validation file. And so some of you on the call may be familiar with the Sage environment. And I'm just going to pull that up very quickly. And regardless of your project type, you can use this repository to upload your data and get a printable report. You do not have to have a login, and you do not have to request an account in order to go in to generate a test report. So if you just wanted to run a test on your project, it's thinking. So while that comes up, now keeping in mind, if I run a RAI export, Sage isn't going to take that because it's not specific to RAI. But even if I have a runaway homeless youth or an SSVF project, and I just want some quick data, I can still run that in one of those formats. But it's primarily used for permanent supportive housing, ESG projects, street outreach. And so the one I have selected is an APR. And so you can go in and choose your file. It uploads. It's like kind of a 16-page document. And actually, we had an error on that one earlier. So if you don't have a Sage account, now the new configuration, unless you're responsible for uploading those reports to HUD, then there's really no reason, like I said, to have a login or create an account. You can just use that from the test site. So let's just jump into, so if I found errors in my report, if I look at this validation file, you'll see that I get some different options of Excel spreadsheets. If I jump in and I just jump automatically to this APR detail report, and I open this one to look for my data issues. Oops. If you have a project with 150 street outreach clients, having all of this data for 150 rows going all the way across is pretty unwieldy. So it's going to be difficult to search through this giant detail report to find where I might have a data issue. Okay, so we want to save this detail as a last resort. And we can start it with our data quality detail. And so for this one, if I knew that I had an issue with social security number, this detail report is going to provide me with the data element, the name of the client ID, and the fact that it's missing. And so if it's client doesn't know or refused, then they would be noted here. Okay, and so here we know that it's data not collected. Actually, that would be the same for those two as well. And so just keeping in mind that updating data on the Excel spreadsheet it's not retroactive, so it doesn't go back and change anything in the system. You would have to go back into that particular client record and make that change. So depending upon what other, the other issues that might be present from a data quality perspective. So here, obviously for SSVF, it's going to be really important that the information on veteran status is completed. Typically, if you have an issue related to relationship to head of household, that has more to do with maybe a client merge. And so now there's 2 people in the household that are listed as self, or somebody has left an enrollment that had been considered the head of household, and then that information hasn't been updated. Okay. And then our issues with disabling condition, those are primarily related to the end user has selected yes as disabling condition, but then when they get to the barriers information, they don't have anything on the barrier screen listed as being an indefinite condition. So it's a disconnect here, and it's going to tell you that this happens to be that for Justin, it was just entered as data not collected. Okay. So the nice thing about these smaller Excel files, it's going to be very specific as to what the data issue is going to be, rather than, again, trying to open the big detailed report. Okay. So that's just kind of some insight into these exports. You do have a lot of other reporting capabilities. If you did just want that quick snapshot for data quality, you can go in and run. It's a 2-page data quality report that's primarily going to focus on the client demographic data and things like client location, disabling condition, veteran status. So it's not, a giant 16-page report. It's a little bit more easier to handle. You have your PIT report, keeping in mind that this isn't going to generate unless you are in emergency shelter, transitional housing, or safe haven. And then if you're considered street outreach, you can run that information. I didn't see anybody on the call that has a PATH project. So if we do, nope, okay. If we do, let us know and we can go through and talk a little bit about your PATH annual report, but there's no point in doing that if we don't have any PATH providers on the call. So the client reports, one of the things to keep in mind is a lot of the reports that you have in your current system, maybe it's the same report that we have in the upgrade. It might just have a different name or a different location. So we're going to ask, because we have 500 users that are going to be in the system practicing here over the next week or so, poke around a little bit in the system. And so if you're used to seeing some sort of a report under enrollments, just take a glance and see before you submit a ticket about where's this report and things like that. So again, lots of these reports are currently available. A couple of the service reports that are really popular to use is the service summary. In addition to the zip code and county, I know that some of you work in Indiana. We had 16 regions. And I think you guys might refer to them as zones within your COC. If you run a zip code and county report, just keep in mind that If your client doesn't have an address with a city and zip code, they're not going to populate on this report. Okay. So if you Jesus brought up a great point on this morning's call, that so we have the zip code county report, and then probably it's turning out to be my favorite report in the system is under the by name list, this active client list. And so it gives you at a glance a lot of the same information that it took us multiple steps to get to for that data export. And one of the things that's a little bit different that's helpful is, again, you can run it for any date range. And if you only wanted to know clients who started their enrollment during this time frame, so I know, we want to know, how many people had a project start date during the month of April, or how many people exited. So it's only going to pull the clients that were exited in April, or if they were active at any point, during the enrollment. Again, only access to your organization. And so let's just, actually, to get more results, I'm just going to select everything. I don't recommend this, but since we have so few clients in the training environment right now, you can do some additional filtering. So if you wanted to only look at veterans, heads of household, if you wanted to hide personally identifying information. So when I run the report, most of the reports in the system have the ability in one of two ways. Oh, wow, look at, wow, people are in the system already. Got some new test clients in there, that's great. And so this list will grow exponentially over the next couple of weeks, which is great. So we get this report, and it's a little helpful, but since I selected multiple projects, I might need some additional information. Okay. So if I want to expand on this particular client, I can click on this, and then it gives me a little more information, but it's still not as useful as it could be. So virtually every report in the system provides you with the ability to export into a different format. So if I click on Excel, it's going to give me the same information I'm seeing now, just what it looks like in an Excel format. It's not going to be very useful. So we primarily want to run this as Excel data. And so when this populates, then you'll see, boy, we do have a lot of new clients in here. That's great. It's a little bit more manageable than that APR. And so if we take a look at our header at the top, this is incredibly helpful for street outreach projects when you're trying to figure out, does my client have an engagement date or a housing project? Does my client have a move-in date? Are they enrolled in PATH? So you can see here, you have a whole column for move-in date, again, which is only required for head of household. Engagement date. So if I ran this just for my street outreach projects, it would show me who has an engagement date. And then if there's a date of determination for a PATH grant, okay? If the client is a runaway homeless youth, then there's some, for our SSBF project, you can see your VA medical code, basic cash income, how many days they've been enrolled. But you as an agency manager, going in and looking at this data and seeing, based on maybe the days enrolled for clients that don't have an engagement date. And what's that, if a client goes 90 days without any contacts, or they've been enrolled for a certain amount of time with no engagement date, do case conference, what do you, whatever your policies are for either exiting or finding another way to engage the client. So I know Jesus and I really like this report because of the different project types that it takes into consideration with the data that you have. Okay. But if I try to, I'm sorry, ooh, that was loud. But if I try to compare like the number of clients I get here at 43 to the clients I might get on the zip code report, again, if my client doesn't have this information, those numbers aren't going to match. So just be careful with the comparison in getting different numbers on different reports. Jesus, I know you talked about that in the earlier training. Do you want to add anything about that report comparison?
I think you already covered it, but yeah, I mean, it's one thing that I like to stress with people is you guys know your data better than we do. We might know the system, but you guys, since are the ones with the data and with the clients, you have a better understanding of what you should be seeing. So I encourage everybody to run as many reports as they can and see the data in many different ways, but just with that caveat to not expect to all the reports to show you the same numbers, because they, especially the federal reports, I mean, they go and they are built based on specific configurations, specific calculations that you will not find in any of these other reports, because these ones, the CAN reports, as we call them, they will give you just the data that it's in your system as entering your system, but they will not follow any of the other guidelines. They're very useful when you're trying to understand your information, your data, but yeah, don't expect them to match on everything, especially in cases. I mean, when you have street outreach, you will not see clients without the date of engagement, for instance, appear in certain areas, but you will most likely see them in here, because in the rest of the reports, I mean, they go by entry and exit date. Just an example of things that might be different in some cases, but it is very useful to and it helps you a lot to see your data in many different ways, because it's the same information, but you're just looking at different angles, and that helps a lot. But everything else, I think you covered it, Michelle.
Okay, great. Well, our small group this afternoon has, you guys have been pretty quiet on the question front. But I think, we've covered the basics of kind of the differences between what you'll see as an agency manager and then as a logging in as the 2020 HMIS user. Some high-level discussion on the reports. So are there does anybody else want to submit any questions or have a request that we review anything else in the system?
Hey, Michelle, actually, I do.
Sure.
I have a question that was passed along to me earlier today. They weren't able to make it to our meeting today, but they wanted me to ask. I know we talked earlier about engagement, and that the engagement date, that when you run the report for data quality, the engagement date is what will trigger the showing up of that information on the data quality report.
Correct.
So my question is, and this especially for people that are operating PATH programs, can they do pre-enrollment entries? A lot of times they have they collect little bits of information at a time, and they start building, their file until they can actually do an enrollment. So the question was, will PATH providers be able to do pre-enrollment entries?
So, so my question would be, so when they say pre-enrollment, do they have, and this kind of goes back to that super secret spreadsheet kind of deal. So do you know if they have a program in the system that would be like similar to a pre-enrollment or PATH, or they just keep that information someplace separate until they put them into the system?
I think that is the question. Is are they going to be able to keep that type of information in HMIS?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they should be, as soon as they have that first encounter. Now, if you're walking down the street and you say hello to someone and it's not somebody that you think you're gonna engage with or follow up on, obviously in that instance, you wouldn't create a client record in the system. But if you're out on purposeful outreach and going to the public library or to the bus station, wherever it is, the mall, to find folks that might be precariously or housed or homeless, the minute that they start that contact, they really should be enrolling the client into whether it's a PATH or another funded type street outreach project. Because if they wait, they're not letting the data tell their story about their project. So when they go to enter the data, if all, it shows that I met you today, you told me your life story today, and I enrolled you into my PATH project. It's not really telling the story of my relationship with that client. So I would have them review what that looks like from a policies and procedures, but it's not a best practice to have a pre-enrollment into a project.
Okay, is there a minimum amount of information? Because the way it was described in my previously was like you go out and you make a contact and you say you meet Joe, and Joe gives you his first name, and then the next week he gives you his last name, and then the week after that he gives you how old he is. So you're slowly building up this amount of information about Joe to the point where you can do an enrollment. So the recommendation for using that information, and I guess that the fear is that they may not have enough information to do an enrollment.
Well, so for PATH, there's a project start date, and then there's a PATH enrollment, which are kind of two different things. So I started an intake. You can create an anonymous, or I found in my experience our outreach teams focus on different areas, like in Indianapolis, different neighborhoods, different parks, other encampments. So it's typically going to be maybe the same outreach professional that would encounter Joe at Circle Center Mall. So, starting that record with something that can help me identify. So when I come back into the system, I know that I'm talking to the same Joe. And so maybe the second time I meet him, he gives me his last name, and he tells me he's 50. So I put in, oh, on that, I guess I meant to do 70. There we go. And so that's an approximate. So, you know, going through this process and then having that project start date and then being able to add those contacts in the updates to the current living situation, you know, that's the best practice, and that's what HHS and SAMHSA's expectations are. When it comes to the data collection, they completely understand that in the nature of the work everyone's doing, they're not, it's unlikely you get all this information in your first meeting. But to get that client record started in the system is really important. So that just might be a, you know, a policy that you know, that they review. Now it would be nice to know if they have a like a pre-screen type project set up, because that has some implications as an HMIS administrator that we can talk about offline. But yeah, I mean, that first encounter, we really want to see him get that project start date. So does anybody else have any other questions? Wow.
I don't think there's any questions. I think everything was clear.
Okay, yeah, I guess it is lunchtime too. I forget kind of when we get going on these, I forget what time it is. So, well, if there aren't any additional questions, I'm happy to stay on if you want to type something in, and we can just go back and forth via the question area. But if there are no additional questions, thank you again for participating. We did just get a question about the recording. Yes, later this evening, we have 2 more webinars after today. So we will get those over to DCED for them to upload to Tony. I don't know, will those be on the Pennsylvania COC website, or do you know how you wanna, where you wanna post those, the recordings?
Yes, depending on the file size, we'll be making them available either through a share file or directly uploaded to the COC website.
Okay, great. I did attempt to email those earlier, some of them, but the file sizes are really big. So getting them posted would be great. So, all right. Well, again, if we don't have any other questions, greatly appreciate the time that you spent with us over the last couple of weeks. We know it's a busy time, and just appreciate and are grateful that you shared some of it with us.
Thank you, Michelle.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Tony. All right.
Okay.
See you later.
Bye.